The way to fix it in air quotes is by letting that person label it. And that means you have to label your emotions. So you might need to label, I'm uncomfortable right now. I'm having the urge to fix it. I need to take a step back. So if you're flustered, if you're anxious, if you're overwhelmed, you're trying to ease your own discomfort rather than helping them learn to deal with theirs.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jodie Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Hello, lovely listeners. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. It is my pleasure to introduce you today to Marie Vakakis, who is founder of the Therapy Hub in Melbourne. And I'm going to ask Marie to share a bit more about the work that she does with her team at the Therapy Hub in just a moment. She is a family therapist, a mental health social worker, presenter, podcaster, and trainer. I actually had the pleasure of being a guest on Marie's wonderful podcast, the Inside Social Work podcast, recently. So make a note to check that one out too. Marie's focus is on supporting adults to have better relationships with the teens and young adults in their lives. But she also facilitates programs for parents, carers, and mental health professionals, teaching skills to build emotional intelligence and promote positive relationships and much more. She's passionate about improving mental health awareness, reducing stigma, early intervention, and prevention. So welcome, Marie.
Thank you. It's so awesome to be on the other side of the podcasting mic.
Oh, it's so good to be able to meet with you again, and we just connected so brilliantly when I was a guest for you, and it's really wonderful to have you as a guest for us here in our community. So thank you for your time. And could you start by please telling us about the Therapy Hub in Melbourne? And one question, because there is a global audience. I wonder if around Australia or indeed overseas, I imagine it's a bit trickier, but whether or not telehealth is an option, because I know a lot of people are really looking for extra help at the moment.
Yeah, so the Therapy Hub counselling is based in Footscray in Melbourne, and we do offer telehealth. So we have at the moment, I think, 9 clinicians working here. Our area of interest is working with adolescents and young adults, and then each person has an additional kind of skill set that they or a special interest that they work with. So, for example, I do a lot of family work and couples therapy. A few of the other practitioners do art therapy and play therapy, so they might work with a slightly younger population. And then a few others have specialty training in sort of like careers counselling or trauma. So adolescence is sort of our overlap, and we try and target that age group. And then we have different kind of specialties within the practice. So we work a lot with the LGBTQIA plus community. We're very gender affirming practice. We work a lot with young people and adults who've recently discovered or have a diagnosis of autism or ADHD. And where possible, we try and bring families into the room. So I guess that's one of our points of difference is the founder, me, being a family therapist, is I really value bringing families and parents into the room where possible. So trying to think about mental health and wellbeing as a system and trying to support those relationships. For the international clients, we do see international clients. We have to kind of check based on country whether our insurance covers it. They're obviously not entitled to any of our Medicare rebates and that kind of thing, but we do have people that see us via telehealth. And we do have parents that engage with online courses like tuning into teens through wherever they're at, if the time zones allow for it.
Yes. Oh, thank you, Marie, so much for giving us that background, because especially the idea that families is such an integral part of the work that you do with young people and young adults, because any mental health struggles or struggles with change or identity, it is a family affair. It does affect everybody. And for families to have the opportunity to learn how to support the young person that they care about with the support of someone as experienced and passionate as yourself. And I just know that your team members will be beautifully aligned with your own values, that it's a big deal for families to feel supported and on the inside when it comes to really making a difference to help their young person. So I'm delighted that we could start with that, and certainly listeners, if you are looking for some extra help or you know someone who is, then the Therapy Hub is a place where you can direct them for an inquiry, and I'll share all the details in the show notes. So, Marie, what are you and your team seeing when it comes to teenage anxiety?
That's such a big question. We're seeing it's hard to know if we're seeing an increase because we're a relatively new practice. We've been practicing here for a couple of years. We are seeing people struggling with adjusting to the changes that we've had over the last few years. So think about what happened in 2020 and 2021. We know here in Melbourne that we had a lot of lockdowns, and across the world, people had various pandemic restrictions that changed how we did things. So there was anxiety in that. A lot of change can be very difficult. And now we're seeing people readjusting back to being busy, being overscheduled. Maybe their social batteries not fully, fully charged. Their stamina for that's not quite there yet. Some have missed a few years of those important developmental milestones. So, dating, working out friendship issues, going to formals or parties or events. So we're seeing a lot of change, um, and I guess working with parents, we're also seeing parents being quite anxious. So anxiety can be a little bit contagious. So if someone in the family is flustered, is anxious, is worried about the pressures of finances or work or trying to adjust to a new schedule, that can have a ripple effect. So a lot of people are struggling a little bit with anxiety, but it doesn't mean they will have an anxiety disorder. And I think that's where the difference is. Our language evolves and people are becoming more aware of emotions, and they'll say, I have anxiety, but they might just mean I have the feeling of anxiety. I'm feeling anxious, just like I might feel happy or sad or worried or concerned. Um, Feeling anxious doesn't mean you have an anxiety disorder. And that's one of the, I guess, the bits that we see is people not knowing exactly what is um, I guess, a healthy anxiety, because anxiety is healthy, it's functional, we need it. And when is it problematic and preventing them going to school, to work, engaging with friends, family, and doing all the things that they would do otherwise. So it's a bit of an opportunity for understanding a bit more about what anxiety is. Um, I think that's what we're seeing.
Yes, yes, and it is a big question, and yeah, thank you for sharing those insights. When you talk about anxiety being a normal human emotion, and it can be quite loaded though, can't it? And it's quite frightening, especially for a parent if they're recognizing their child is feeling anxiety or experiencing anxiety, can be quite frightening. So what how do you explain to parents and families and teenagers around what normal anxiety looks like versus anxiety that might be spilling over or has already become a problem?
As you asked that question, I had a kind of flashback as to what made me study family therapy, and it was having these exact kinds of conversations. I worked in schools with teenagers, and I realized there's a really big gap in between what we do in the counseling space and then what goes home to families. And I wasn't sure how to actually to do that, how to bring parents into the room, how to incorporate families and help them with education, with understanding mental health or mental ill health or whatever was happening for that young person without shaming them, blaming them, and empowering them to also be involved. And so the family therapy degree was one of the things that I thought would really help with that. So now being able to integrate that, one of the things I do with parents is help their young person label the emotion. So we need to name it to tame it. And so some people don't know. Anxiety is one of those things that someone can have a diagnosable anxiety disorder and not get treated for 15 or 20 years because they just didn't know that they didn't need to feel that way. And I was telling this to a recent client, and she was like, "Yeah, I had no idea that not everybody can feel their heart beating all the time." And she had no idea that those symptoms could be reduced. Um, so I guess the tip I would give to parents is it's okay for a child to be anxious. It's when it's impacting day to day functioning. So if you've got a tummy ache or you're nervous before an exam, that makes sense. That's totally fine. If you're anxious before a job interview, that's fine. So it's starting to sit with that, um, and helping the young person name it. Oh, we've got a tummy ache. I wonder if you're nervous about this. I wonder if perhaps you're anxious. Maybe you're worried. So helping them label it starts to, I guess, get the process happening of naming it to taming it.
Yes. It's so important, isn't it, to be able to accurately name how we feel and to help our young people to do that. What are some of the tools you use? Do you have, I mean, what comes to mind for me is the feelings wheel, which I've got the cushion in my next room. And, I've bought that cushion. I originally sort of thought I could take it to schools for presentations and things, but it's ended up just being a staple here in our family room, so I have it as a tool there to help support our kids to develop a more nuanced vocab around how they're feeling. And that's one tool, I guess, it's available. You could get a poster or you could just print it out offline. But how is it that is it just through time that you help young people to learn how to be more tuned in to how they're feeling and accurately label it? Or what are some of the strategies that you teach to families and kids to help them with that?
When it comes to working with parents, one of the first things is we need to make sure that they know how to describe their own emotions first. So I use the example, and think about if you've got a 5-year-old and you've just gone and got an ice cream on a day that's much nicer than today, and you walk out of the store and the kids got their cone and an ice cream falls off and they start crying because they dropped an ice cream. If you said, "Well, tough, we've got to go, stop crying, we're running late," they might stop crying, but not because they're no longer sad, but because it's unsafe or they get scolded for crying. You could drop down to sort of eye level, on your knees. "Oh my goodness, are you okay? That's fine. Here's another ice cream. I'll get you another one. We'll be okay. Do you want extra sprinkles? How about I get you 2 scoops?" You're empathizing, but maybe you're overcommitting to that. So you're not giving them a chance to express their emotion. In emotion coaching, it's, "Oh dear, dropped your ice cream. That sounds sad. I wonder if you're disappointed." Maybe you give them a cuddle, they stop, the sobbing might calm down, and then you problem solve. "Look, we're running late, we've got to go. I can give you a scoop of mine, or actually, we have a bit more time. How about we go get another one?" And by having hundreds of those little interactions over the course of your life, you start to associate, dropped ice cream, sad feeling, that must be disappointment. So it can't just start straight away. We have to have built it up, but we can start building from wherever the family's at, which will take a bit of time. So we need to be able to identify what's that emotion, not dismiss it, not discourage it, not try and ignore it. Dismissing it is also in that, it's okay, I'll get you another one. So that can be really tricky for parents. "Oh my God, you're anxious. It's okay. I'll fix this for you. You can call me if so overcompensating for that means the young person never learns to know the emotion, sit with it, and then either boundary set or problem solve.
Mm. What about parents who've never had that modeled for them? And I know that as parents, it's so distressing and it's meant to be, isn't it? When our kids are distressed, where, there's this contagious nature of the emotion. And so we are moved to support them. And yet the default can sometimes be to want to fix things, like you were saying, back to make it better, because their distress can be really hard for us to cope with. How do you support parents to cope with that distress that comes from seeing their children suffering?
It's not just limited to parents. I think even when I do couples therapy or work with friendship groups or employment groups, people want to try and fix it. And yet, on the receiving end, nobody likes that. We just want to be heard. And so, when I run my online parenting courses, one of the takeaways that people will say is, "I've learned that I don't have to fix it." And that is probably the biggest thing. The way to fix it in air quotes is by letting that person label it, sit with it. And that means you have to label your emotions. So you might need to label, "I'm uncomfortable right now. I'm having the urge to fix it. I need to take a step back." Because it takes a calm brain to calm a brain. So if you're flustered, if you're anxious, if you're overwhelmed, you're trying to ease your own discomfort rather than helping them learn to deal with theirs. So that can take a little bit of practice in trying to identify, where do you feel the discomfort? Is your stomach getting knotted up? Are you having the urge to fix it? Can you recognize it in maybe the fact that you're like, "I just want to get a word in. I've got the answers right now." Like, where is it showing up for you? Taking a breath and maybe starting to think, it's not my job to fix it.
For parents who, or employees or partners or anyone who hears that, but also says, "Yes, but it's so obvious. Yes, but I can clearly see what will make a difference here. I could see it coming even, the skeptics who might challenge that and sort of question whether or not fixing it is something that is unhelpful." What do you say to people? Listeners might be sort of thinking, "Yeah, but," what do you say?
As soon as I hear the "Yeah, but," look, when you're working through, and one of the things I teach in emotion coaching is, 5 steps, and one of the steps is actually boundary setting or problem solving. It just can't be the first thing. So if you were to tell some, "I've got a job interview tomorrow and I'm really nervous," and they're like, "Well, just don't be. You've got," it's like, that's not helpful. But if someone was to say, "Well, it sounds like you're really excited about that," or "I know it means a lot to you." It does. You have a chat, you have a conversation, and then maybe it's problem solving. Look, would it be helpful if we did a role play? Or, if I drove you there so that you don't miss the bus, or you can problem solve. It just has to come later. Like, that connection is the most important bit. And young people, especially, parents are moving from what we call manager to consultant. They need to start to learn to figure this out for themselves. They need to fumble through it, make a mistake within some, boundaries of safety. And then maybe if they're fumbling through it, if it's multiple times, then it could be, look, hey, I've noticed every time you have a maths exam, these things happen. I wonder if next time, is there something I can help you with? Or would it be helpful if I told you what worked for me? Or, but we need to sometimes ask permission because we're trying to teach them how to manage it themselves, and also role model that effective communication. So every time you role model that to your young person, that's being ingrained in them. And they'll take that to their friends, to future romantic relationships, how they parent. So there's a really good opportunity there to keep teaching then rather than fixing.
Yes, and it's like you say, it's over many opportunities, over weeks and months and years of connecting with somebody, whether or not that is as a parent or in another type of relationship. And undoubtedly, because we're human, sometimes we get it wrong. And listeners listening today will have heard similar ideas shared over the course of listening to my podcast, perhaps your podcast, and learning about you know doing the best we can in the relationships that we have in the different roles that we have. But sometimes we just don't get it right. I'll share a personal example. I can't think of the exact example of what happened, but I can distinctly remember what our daughter said to me. She was upset about something, and I was listening, and I've learned to manage my discomfort, and that took time. That took time because it can be quite distressing when your child is distressed and you're learning just to listen and start with some empathy. And I know better than to turn it onto me and to say, "Well, I've done this. I know not to do that." But mindfully in that conversation, I said to her, after a period of time, wasn't first up, but I said to her, "Look at all these caveats. Look at all these qualifiers I'm saying. I'm a good parent." Um, I said to her, "I've been in that situation before. I know what it feels like. And what I found helpful was this." And I thought, and it was really interesting because I thought I was kind of doing it right, so to speak. I thought I was approaching it from a perspective that would really be supportive for her. And she said, "You know what, Mum? It's not helpful for me when you tell me about your experiences." And I was conscious not to sort of say, "Well, I did this and everything worked out." It was just that I was in an effort to try to empathize. I was overstepping, I think, and I think she interpreted it as a point of view. Well, I'm invalidating what you're saying because I've been through the same thing and I did it differently. And so I loved that she could say that to me. I loved that. And it was a real learning curve, as it all is, for me to understand, well, I need to respond in the way that works for her as well. So it's about learning how another person operates, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's such a beautiful example because when you are trying to empathize, sometimes we want to try and find a similar situation we've been in or try and connect with that. And it may land, it may not. Sometimes there's no perfect balance. But what I do know and what we do see in the research is that, especially for adolescents, they are more sensitive to criticism. And so we have to be very careful that what might seem like a really good, reasonable suggestion, that if you told your best friend, they'd be like, yeah, that's awesome. A teenager might feel like you don't think they're good enough or smart enough or can't work it out. They are very self-conscious. They're figuring out their identity. We have to think about that developmentally, what's happening for them at that age, and that might they might perceive that as you don't think they can do it or they're not capable, or here's just another example of how I stuffed it up and here my parents go again telling me how I got it wrong. So there's so many things happening for them. And it may land, it may not. But I think doing more of that sort of, what you were saying, you could then say, look, actually, I'm really sorry. I wasn't picking up what you're putting down. I really messed that up. Could we try again?
Yes.
Totally fine. It's okay to admit you got it wrong because then they learn, ah, if I get it wrong, if I yell at someone or if I make a comment that's not helpful to a friend, my parents have now given me the tools to say, I actually spoke out of line. What I did wasn't okay. And then that relationship still stays strong.
Yes, yes. Like you said before, the connection is so powerful and it's the foundation on which everything else builds. And so paramount that we maintain that. And for parents or partners or employers or employees, anyone listening who reflects on the way they've operated because that's what was role modeled for them in their life. And they've been quick to jump to problem solving and might be thinking, oh, goodness, gosh, well, I didn't know this. I've never heard this before. I like to say when we know better, we do better. We're always learning. Um, how would you how would you invite people listening who would like to start to make a change to kind of what would be a good launching pad? Would it be having a conversation with their family to say, I mean, I don't know, but having a conversation to say, you know what, in the past, I'm aware that this is the way that I've responded, and sort of flag it as, look, I'm learning about this. I'd like to try a different approach. I might not always get it right, or is it just about dipping their toe in the water and finding some opportunities? How would you start, and what would you say to people who might be sort of feeling like, oh, I've been stuffing it up?
I think the fact that you're listening to this podcast and you're doing some of your own development is already a sign that you're the kind of person who wants to do things better. So that's already a really great step. Sometimes if you've got the kind of relationship where you kind of debrief about your day, you might say, "Hey, actually, I heard this podcast today and it came to my attention that sometimes I like to fix things and I think I'm being super helpful, but I wonder if maybe other people don't see it that way." So you could open it up honestly and just saying, this is what I heard. I do that often when I learn a new technique or when I do some leadership development. I might come back to my team and say, look, I've recently learned about this, which I'm trying to implement into my leadership style. Is this something that has been a point of difference for us? Or is there a way I could do this better? So we can slowly, slowly start introducing new concepts and that be totally fine.
It certainly opens the door too, doesn't it? When we can show that little bit of vulnerability to say, look, I'm going to try something new, or I've learned something about myself, or I've learned something about relationships, or about this role that I'm in as, like you say, as a leader, or a parent, or a partner, or um, a teacher in a classroom. It certainly that strengthens connections, doesn't it? And it certainly gives the people that you're communicating with the opportunity to feel more safe doing that in return.
Absolutely. And especially when it comes to things like parenting, often when I ask parents, well, what kind of young person do you want to raise or what kind of adult? And they'll say things like, resilient, capable, have friendships, have, great relationships. Often they want more for their child than they had. And so then sometimes it's using those values and saying, well, this is a pathway to that. So if you want to have an honest relationship, that can start by you modeling that. I stuffed this up. How can I fix it? If you want to build resilience, we build resilience through connection, not through playing devil's advocate and adding more challenge to that young person's life. So sometimes it can be taking a moment to think, oh, maybe we're at a point of transition. And I find that grade 6 to year 7 age where we start to see families maybe struggle with readjusting to child to teenage years. What's my role now? What kind of parent do I want to be? What kind of parent can I be? And do my actions match that? Because unfortunately, people don't care about your intentions. It's your actions that is important to them. So if you're saying, I value quality time together and I value family time, but you're working an 80-hour week, those things don't match up. And sometimes that can be quite confronting. If we're talking about wanting strong connection, and the only interaction you have with your young person is pick up your shoes, we're running late, why haven't you done this? Or like, we need to think about that stuff.
Peter and I, my husband and I, recently had a conversation, and it's funny. I don't talk about our son because that's his choice. Our daughter said, "Make it all about me," every time I'm on stage, and I share with permission, but I also share in sort of general ways about things that are happening because I think it's really insightful. And I, she since she was a toddler, she just leaves a little trail wherever she goes. That hasn't changed. It hasn't changed, and she's 12. And I remember, how when you have we have two children, and one operates very much like me, our son, and our daughter operates very much like Pete. And I remember years and years and years ago, he said to me, he sort of brought it to the surface, and he said, "Remember, you're not parenting a little you here. You are parenting a very, very different person, and a very different number two to number one." Because, of course, we kind of it's a lot of trial and error, isn't it? And we agreed, we talk about this regularly, but we agreed that no matter what we've tried when it comes to encouraging that kind of seeing a task through. You peel a mandarin, you eat the mandarin, put the mandarin peel in the compost bin. And, that's just one of many examples. For a long time, it was just pure frustration. And we tried the carrot and the stick, I'm talking metaphorically, of course, and just tried lots of support, reminders, rewards charts. This is over a long time. And eventually, do you know what? We just had this conversation, and a lot of positive reinforcement, of course. I'm a good parent. I say good things to my kids, and I don't just see the things that are going wrong. Of course I don't. But there was quite a weight on me around this idea that, it was so bloomin' frustrating. And in the end, we just agreed, you know what? At the end of the day, it's not really that important. And what we don't want is to spend our time as parents telling her off. It in the majority of our interactions, because it really could be. It's that bad sometimes. So we just agreed that we will comfortably and casually say, and it's interrupting for her. She might be with a friend, and I might say, "Come on out, sweetheart. Can you please just take care of this, and then you can go back." So it's an interruption to what she was doing. She would rather not have to do it, but it's said with kindness and a calm approach, not a gruffness, not an annoyance.
Mm.
Other times, I just do it for her when it's bothering me and she's out of the house, not as a general rule, but I just think, you know what? I just don't want to keep sweating on that kind of stuff. But it took a long time to get there.
Yeah, I think that's really important around the technique you use is called gentle reminders. So it's a thing about sort of saying like, "Hey, whatever, Samantha, mandarin peel." It's these small things because you're right. It could be the bane of your existence, and then you could be gridlocked and locking horns and fighting over this, and then sometimes you think, I could have just done it and had harmony.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not the way it just evolved and escalated, I think. And I'm not someone to yell. I don't raise my voice, but the frustration, the irritation is evident when it's, being experienced. And my kids are really sensitive to that, I think, because I live with an anxiety disorder and we're very open about how we feel and lots of labeling and naming and all that. But it's been a beautiful, beautiful change. And she's in that stage of transition from, grade 6 to year 7 next year. And I want to maintain that connection. And yeah, so it's been a really positive change here. But and that's the thing, like we can do things differently. as we learn and as we grow, we don't get it right all the time. We're just not going to, are we?
No, absolutely not. And what you're really focusing on in that story, I think, is that connection over correction. Is you really want that
Mhm.
connection to be. And I mean, as you were saying, that's like, oh my goodness, that's me. I leave a trail of teacups everywhere I go. At at work, at home, and they could scold me, my admin team could be like, "Can you believe we've run out of teacups?" And there's one, like, on my desk, on my coffee table. I've probably made one and left it next to the kettle, and there'll be days where I'll go through and pick them all up, and other times are just like, "That's just her. She does a million other things that are wonderful, I hope.
Yes.
I'm just gonna pick up the bloody teacups."
Yes.
So sometimes it's just someone's quirks.
That's it, and it's always been important, and one of the things that I like to adopt, well, I try to adopt, is a strengths-based approach, and, I've tried to apply that. Dr. Lee Waters wrote the Strength-Based Parenting, I think was the name of her book. It's on the bookshelf behind me, but I've been trying to use her strengths to help with this little, trail of destruction. I'm still working on that. But I'll tell you a funny story I heard from Claire Orange when, I heard her present in Perth. Hilarious story. She was talking about the floor-drobe. Are you familiar with that term, the floor-drobe?
Yeah.
Yes. So she said, parents, particularly ladies, she said, remember that? She said, if you've got a kid who has a floor-drobe in their room, yes, we have one of those in her room as well. She said, okay, mums listening, those knickers that you have in your drawer that might be a bit lacy or a bit, sexy and maybe a bit uncomfortable and a bit, of a seldomly worn kind of addition to the underwear drawer. She said, what you do is you put them on, you hitch them up your backside a little bit, you put on a t-shirt, so you're kind of dressed, but not really. You walk into your kid's room, you go, oh, these have been up my bum all day and they're so uncomfortable. Is this the washing? And she said, and you just wriggle them off, drop them on the floor dry pile and say, well, if this is where the washing is accumulating, I'm adding to it. Honestly, I laughed and laughed. But yes, you sometimes have to get a bit creative, don't you, when parenting?
Yeah, absolutely. Um,
Yes.
but if we bring it back to that anxiety bit, is the relationship is really important, and the age that you're describing now, I think parents. One of the things when they try to fix it, they might not realize that when the young person doesn't want to, that fix it, that solution, it can feel like rejection, and then that creates anxiety for parents. So it's starting to be really intentional and mindful about what's happening for you, because we all react to each other. We're all in relationships and in dialogue with people all the time. So if you're trying to help them manage their anxiety, they're like, no, 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 I don't want it. And you're like, but I can see there's something wrong. That can feel rejecting. And they might need some time to talk it through with friends, hear it from somebody else, because they want to push away from their parents. It's natural, it's normal. Have you heard the swimming pool analogy of, secure attachment is like the edges of a swimming pool, and they've gone off from the bit that they can step on. They go out into the deep end, and maybe they've swum out a bit too far, and they swim back and they hold on to the end of the swimming pool. And parents like, yes, this is great. I've got my young person back, and then they not just go back into the deep end, they push off with so much force, just like you're doing off, sort of when you do a flip at the end of a lap pool, you push up, and that can feel so wounding and fill the parents with so much rejection. But that's normal and that's
Mhm.
really healthy. And if we can keep focusing on that connection, that's going to help, because it does settle. Then they do come back to parents and as mentors, as teachers, rather than managers.
Yes, I loved what you said before about our role evolving into a consultant rather than a manager. And it's it's hard because it's change, but it's also delightful to see our young people growing up and becoming independent. And it's letting go, isn't it? It's Lenore Skenazy's work. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but she was labeled the worst mum in America when she let her 9-year-old catch the subway in New York home, because she asked him, what's something you'd love to do that you've never done? And he said, I want to be dropped somewhere and catch public transport home without a parent. And she'd grown up in a household that supported similar types of adventures and exploration and in age appropriate ways. And she wrote a blog about it because she was a journalist at the time. And she was just vilified for this decision as a parent being very irresponsible. And I think that, sometimes I think our instinct is to hold on and not let go and not enable these opportunities of growth and independence and mistake making and risk taking. And she founded an organization called Let Grow, and she works with schools all over America now. And it's been a real launching point for her in terms of this work. But gee, it's hard.
Yeah, and you said, it's change, and change usually comes with anxiety.
Yes.
But parents will feel that anxiety. Very rarely do I work with a young person who has anxiety where no one else in the family does.
Mm,
So we can't, sometimes we can't cure it, we can't get rid of it. It's trying to teach a family how to support it, how to understand it, how to label it, what people need to regulate, when they need to recharge their battery. It's finding ways, just like with maybe some other chronic health conditions, to manage it well and live, satisfying, fulfilling lives. It's that not having the empathy, feeling the disconnection, maybe feeling criticized, they all add to it.
you mentioned the idea of regulation, and that can look like lots of different things for different people, can't it? Could you talk to us about emotional regulation, what it means, and some examples of emotional regulation in practice or strategies, for example?
Yeah, so it's sort of when there's a really good YouTube clip. I think it's a Dan Siegel analogy of flipping your lid. So you can YouTube search that. It's really great. But it's essentially when our body is having all those physical sensations that usually come with something like anxiety or fear or worry, and we sort of go offline. So it's sort of like maybe the internet's working, but the Wi-Fi has gone out. So we're not really focused. We're not able to talk calmly. Maybe our heart rate's going up. So maybe people can start to resonate with some of those feelings. And you see, like little kids, they'll cry when they're overtired. And you don't just tell them stop crying. You give them a cuddle. You know that they need soothing. They need just to breathe, maybe swaddle. Then they, can regulate and go back to sleep or kind of move on through the next bit of their day. And we're the same. And we all respond differently. And this is where sometimes if you've got the kind of relationship where you can actually ask someone, well, what do you need when you're anxious? Or what can I do for you when you're scared? For some people, it's physical exercise. It might be clear your head, go for a walk. For other people, if they're used to feeling panic, that increased heart rate might remind them of panic. So they might actually really hate that. Someone might really love mindfulness, and someone else might want to, throw a hacky sack at the wall as hard as they can to get the anger out. So it's really just trying to find what helps your body. There's no one size fits all. Something movement based can be helpful. I find some young people like to just lie on the floor and have like a weighted blanket or a heat pack, hot water bottle kind of on their chest. And some will practice deep breathing exercise, but they're all learned behaviors, and they all need to be sometimes learned when we're not actually in that panic, because
Yes.
then we can't remember them.
Yes. It reminds me of a quote from Dr. Christopher McCurry, who's been a guest on the podcast also, but who I spoke to at length wearing another hat. And he said, strike while the iron's cold. And I loved that. And in light of what you were just saying about if it is a strategy that might be around breathing or mindfulness or using the senses, that to establish a consistent sort of practice means you're better able to draw on those skills when the iron's hot. And like you were saying about when the panic sets in, certainly not the time to sort of introduce something new or draw on something that's not been practiced, because it could create more anxiety and distress because the the brain's a bit offline and it's a bit hard to concentrate. So yeah, absolutely fantastic examples. And the idea of movement is so powerful. That's it, really bringing that fight or flight response to a natural end, because it's like you've said at the start. Anxiety is completely normal. It rises and falls with stressful events and situations. And you also were really wonderful in saying that when it's extreme, it's frequent, it's getting in the way. That's when it is becoming a problem. I want to revisit what you were saying earlier about young people who are evidently struggling with their mental health. It's evident to teachers, it's evident to the child, no doubt, and to parents. But and this is kicking off the swimming pool wall, of course, but when parents feel really at a loss as to what to do to try to support their young person who is not the least bit interested in opening a conversation, let alone going and seeing somebody to maybe get a little bit of extra help. What would you recommend for parents who are facing those challenges?
So that means sometimes we can't force someone to get help unless their physical health or mental health is beyond the point where they're causing harm to themselves.
Yeah.
We can't force that. So maintaining a good relationship is often really helpful, and sometimes maybe even problem solving. So being really honest, look, I'm really worried about you, not you're worrying me. And being specific, I've noticed that you're not yourself. I've noticed that you're avoiding English classes. I can see that every Friday before netball training, this and this happens. So being really specific and then saying, I wonder if maybe you've got anxiety, or wait, maybe you're anxious. No, I don't know for sure. I'm not the best person to say, but could it be this? Sometimes asking, and I see parents, they're like, I've asked them what's wrong. I'm like, well, walk me through what happened. And they'll be like, tell me what's going on. So, yeah, you're right. You did ask them. But sometimes they don't know. Sometimes they don't have the language. They might not know how to say, I'm anxious, I'm overwhelmed, I'm nervous. Or they might have myths around counseling is going to be expensive, or everyone at school is going to know, or I don't want to be different, or I've heard my parents say that finances are tight, so I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to add more problems to my family. There's almost always a reason, and it's often very selfless. So sometimes it can be problem solving some of that. With teachers, I think they're in a really amazing position because they have a captive audience. So you can actually tell the whole class, all right, we're going to take a brain break now, devices down, we're going to do a 5-minute breathing exercise. This is really great to use when we're feeling anxiety. So they can actually sprinkle in that mental health education to the whole class. So there are different ways to introduce it.
It's so interesting what's happening in schools. And I was recently on another podcast, and Lisa Downs, who's a Master of Applied Psychology, she's also a primary teacher and a leader and a coach. She was talking about in her classrooms, I mean, how lucky are those kids to have someone like Lisa at the helm? She's introduced this idea to them about being in their comfort zone and crossing their arms across their chest, almost like a little hug where your hands kind of rest on the front of your shoulders, crossed across your chest, being in their stretch zone where they put their hands on their shoulders, and then being in the panic zone where they might put their hands on their heads. And she's teaching them over time to be able to tune in to where they're at in their bodies and in their heads so that they are in the best place to be able to learn, and also helps them develop the strategies that they need to move from one zone to another. But it's the recognition at the start, isn't it? So
Yes.
it's a really powerful place that teachers can come from.
Absolutely. And for those younger primary school year levels, some people do the zones of regulation and they run that across a whole classroom. So there's so many different strategies. But for parents, it's trying not to use threats or guilt, trying to stay positive about help seeking behavior and encouraging what we call resilient help seeking behavior. So you might have gone once to a therapist and you didn't gel with them. It's okay to try someone else. You might have found that that person had a weird smell in their room, or you didn't, there was a gender difference, or you just felt they were a bit too formal. It's okay to find someone else. And some people don't know that. It can take a few times to find the right person at the right stage of life.
It's important, isn't it, to take the time to find the right person?
Yeah, and to not feel like you failed if it wasn't a good fit. And for parents, they can role model positive help seeking behavior. So they can say, I've had a really tough day. I'm going to go for a walk to clear my head. Or there's an issue I'm having at work. I'm been talking to our workplace EAP or psychologist or therapist around how to best manage that. So they can sprinkle into the conversation examples of them seeking support. And if they are really struggling, they can also see a counsellor to try and test out different strategies with the support of someone who can help them manage that rejection, that frustration, that overwhelm, so they can respond to things really intentionally.
Yes. Oh, I'm so pleased you raised that. It sometimes can feel like a barrier, can't it? Because it might mean getting a new referral from the GP, and it might be an uncomfortable decision for people to make, feeling like they might be letting the counsellor down or the psychologist down, or some people might feel like that could lead to some sort of conversation about why you're leaving, or a phone call, or and so I think it's really important that we talk about this. And I recently read Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, written by Laurie Gottlieb. I don't know if you've read it. Have you, Marie?
I haven't read it, no. I've got such a stack of books to read.
I bet you do. I bet you do. And add it to your list. It's excellent. And it's a therapist, her therapist, and our lives revealed. And she sort of peels back the curtain on what it's like as a therapist when you're working with a patient where you know the patient isn't connecting with you necessarily. And she talks about what's happening for her and how she encourages the patient to, makes me anxious thinking about it, have an appointment where you can have that conversation and sort of part ways. But that's very confronting for a lot of people. So, you have to do what's right for you. But really interesting read, and just gives you a little bit of a peek behind the curtain for anyone listening about what goes on in the life of a psychologist. So, especially one who's seeing a psychologist herself. So, Marie, you have shared so many pearls of wisdom with us here today around resilient coping, around emotional regulation, around the idea of distress tolerance, and around name it to tame it, and emotional regulation and strategies. And they're just some of the things that you've shared with us. And I know this episode is going to be super helpful for listeners who are looking to be able to better support the people that they love and care about. So how can people connect with you and your work?
Yeah, so I'll give you a link to some of the online parenting workshops, not just the ones that I run, but there's quite a few really good ones that might be helpful. I do have a workbook, My Teen Won't Listen to Me, 6 Ways to Understand Your Teen Better and Support Wellbeing. So I'll give that, but people can find me at thetherapyhub.com.au, and I'm about to launch a second website too, which will be marievakakis.com.au, something like that.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, but on it's just being really mindful on things like, Facebook and LinkedIn and those sorts of things. I can't respond to individual, questions of families. So I think that if you kind of need that extra support, you have to go through that kind of referral process and get that support and counselling through the practice.
Yes, thank you. And Vakakis is how you spell Marie's surname, but of course that'll all be in the podcast details. So thank you for your time today. I'm so delighted to have had the chance to talk with you again. And please, listeners, if you are looking for some extra help, please have a look at the Therapy Hub online. I'll put that link in the show notes. So Marie, thank you again for your time.
No problem. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for joining me for another episode. Hope you have a great afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. And I will very much look forward to being back with you again next Wednesday. Take care. Bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr. Jodie Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.